Hey everyone, my name is AL.com and I work with AL.com. Today I am here live to talk with you about the case of Brittany Smith. Now, Brittany is a North Alabama woman who is charged with murder for killing a man that she says raped her. Now, she is facing a charge of murder. If she is convicted, she could face up to life in prison. So let's go over a little bit about the crime before I bring in our reporter to tell us a little more about the case. So Brittany is charged with killing Todd Smith at her house in Stevenson, Alabama, which is North Alabama, in January of 2018. Now, Brittany says that after Todd raped and assaulted her that night, he then tried to kill her brother, and that's when she shot Todd. Now, recently, Brittany did ask a Jackson County judge to dismiss her charge under Alabama's Stand Your Ground provisions. Stand Your Ground is a complicated issue, but here's the gist. In 2006, Alabama adopted the Stand Your Ground provisions to its self-defense law, and that essentially eliminates the duty to retreat from a situation as long as the person who is defending themselves is not doing something illegal. Again, that's a little bit of a boiled down version, but that's the gist here. And the Jackson County judge decided that Brittany did not meet those requirements and did not dismiss her charge. So our reporter, Ashley Rimkus, who has been following the case, is here today to talk with us a little bit about the case, what's next, and what we can expect.
Hey, Ivana. So I just want to kind of introduce everybody to the three people who are sort of the main people that you'll need to know to understand this case. First is Brittany Smith, of course. As you mentioned, she is a 32-year-old mother of 4 children from Stevenson, which is a tiny town over in northeast Alabama in Jackson County. And at this point, she's facing the fight of her life. If she's convicted in this case, of course, as you mentioned, she could face up to life in prison. The second person that you'll need to know is Todd Smith. He was a 38-year-old who bred pit bulls, and he lived just across the state line in Tennessee. He and Brittany had, met each other, kind of casually, as teenagers, sort of as we do through friends, that kind of thing. But they had actually reconnected shortly before this shooting happened because she bought a puppy from him. As I mentioned, he was a breeder. And Todd is the man who actually died in Brittany's kitchen during the early morning hours of January 16th of 2018. And that was after Brittany said that he had raped her earlier in the night. Now, a third person that you'll need to know is Chris McCallie. He is Brittany's brother, and he is the person who Brittany says that Todd was actually attacking, choking, when she fired those deadly shots.
So when was Brittany charged in this? Was she charged the day after Todd died, right then, or when did that come about?
So it was actually the next day, and Brittany and her brother had initially reported to the authorities that her brother Chris was actually the one who had shot Todd in the kitchen. But then the next day, Brittany went to the authorities and confessed that she was actually, in fact, the shooter.
So I know that Brittany had a court hearing recently to claim that this case fell under Alabama's Stand Your Ground provisions. So tell us a little bit about what happened at that hearing and who argued what.
So essentially, Brittany did ask the judge to grant her immunity and dismiss the murder charge, as you mentioned, under Stand Your Ground, which you've explained. And Brittany and her lawyers essentially argued that she killed Todd because he was choking her brother, and that she acted in defense of herself and her brother Chris when she did that. They argued that Todd was currently threatening to kill all 3 of them, himself, Brittany, and Chris, and that essentially, Brittany had to protect herself and her brother, that Todd was an immediate threat. And they said that because Todd had already, according to Brittany, assaulted her and raped her earlier in the night, that she was scared for her life, and, that she was scared that he would kill her because somebody else had found out about the rape.
Right. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what the prosecution argued?
Yeah, so Jason Pierce is the Jackson County District Attorney, and he is the person who is prosecuting the case. And essentially that he argued at the Stand Your Ground hearing that Brittany was not a credible witness, that the judge, shouldn't believe her, account of what had happened. And he argued that the shooting was not justified because Brittany's brother Chris was the person who actually brought the gun into the house. It was not Todd's gun. It was Brittany's brother's gun. And he argued that essentially when Chris brought the gun into the situation, that would have been what escalated it. And Todd was there, or excuse me, Chris, Brittany's brother, was there to confront Todd about the allegations of the assault earlier in the night. And the district attorney also said that, Todd wasn't armed with a deadly weapon, so Brittany wasn't justified. That's essentially what he argued.
Right. Well, and there was something that was happening about a gas station and about a gas station clerk. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Tell us how that clerk came into this story.
Yeah, so shortly after when Brittany says that she was raped, she said that Todd had said that he wanted a cigarette, and that she was just trying to keep the situation calm. She was scared and didn't want to have any further violence. And so she had called and asked if her mom could drive the two of them to the Matco, which was just down the street. And it was snowing that night, so they obviously, wouldn't want to walk. It was very cold. And her brother, Chris, actually had come over to drive them to the store to get some cigarettes. And Brittany went inside. Her brother, Chris, and Todd were out in the car. And she told the clerk, Paige Painter was the clerk's name, that she needed a piece of paper. And on the paper, she wrote down Todd's name and said that if she was found dead later, that he was the one who had done it. And the clerk actually testified at the stand your ground hearing and said that she had seen injuries on Brittany, and that Brittany, had told her that Todd had choked her out, and that she had, woken up after being unconscious. And so she had this piece of paper that Brittany gave her with Todd's information on it. Brittany goes back out to the car. Her brother drives her and Todd back to the house, and as they're getting out of the car, she tells her brother, "Hey, you should go back to the store and talk to Paige down at the Matco." And so at that point, Paige conveyed to Chris that something was wrong, something was going on. And according to Paige's testimony, she told Chris that apparently Brittany had been raped by Todd and was being held hostage. And so that's when Brittany's brother came over to Brittany's house and confronted Todd, and that's kind of how this all went down.
So both sides at this hearing got to present their arguments as to if this case and if Brittany's specific incident fell under the Alabama Stand Your Ground provision. So you kind of walked us through both of those arguments. Tell us what the judge ruled and what the judge said in that ruling.
So the judge issued a really stunning in the amount of detail order. I have a copy of it here. It was 19 pages. And the judge ruled that Brittany had not proven that she should be granted immunity. The judge essentially wrote in the order that she didn't really think Brittany was credible. She didn't seem to believe Brittany's account of what happened. She pointed to some inconsistent statements, and that includes the 911 call that Brittany made right after the shooting. As we mentioned earlier, Brittany and her brother initially said that her brother Chris was the shooter, and of course Brittany later confessed. And in the 911 call, that's where that kind of started, the idea that Chris had been the shooter. And also in the 911 call, Brittany had said that Todd tried to rape her, but that he hadn't actually done so. In that call, she said she had not been raped. But I think one thing that's really important to note is that during the testimony at the Stand Your Ground hearing, a nurse who saw Brittany shortly after the shooting testified that memory loss and confusion, that sort of thing, are common reactions to trauma. And she had documented trauma in the form of more than 30 injuries, including bruises, bite marks, and evidence of strangulation on Brittany's body. So I think there's pretty good reason to believe that that would have been a traumatic experience there. And of course, as I said, the nurse, testified that Brittany had been strangled, hit multiple times, and held down. One thing the judge did write in her order also was that she thought the evidence was consistent with a physical assault, like a strangulation, that kind of thing, but not with a rape, as Brittany had testified. The nurse did testify that she could not say with certainty whether Brittany had been raped, but she also said that most sexual assault cases don't have physical proof, such as genital trauma or DNA evidence, and neither of those things were found in Brittany's case. One other thing, the judge also seemed to really take issue with the fact that Brittany had not called police to report the rape earlier in the night. But Brittany has said that she didn't believe the police would believe her or help. So.
Right. So you said all of that was in the judge's order. That's a pretty detailed order
Yes.
from a judge. I know I've seen a lot of those orders, and usually they don't go into that much detail. So that is really
No.
interesting. And I know that you had reported before that Brittany's lawyers are going to appeal this decision about the judge not dismissing the case. So what's next in this appeals process?
So actually, just yesterday, Judge Holt granted an order from Brittany's defense attorneys to put the murder case on hold. Essentially, it's called a stay, and that just means that it's going to be paused. The case won't go to trial. There won't be hearings in Judge Holt's courtroom while that appeal's pending. And as for the appeal, Brittany's chances of winning seem pretty dismal at this point. I've spoken to some legal experts about how this will work, and essentially Brittany will ask the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals to essentially force Judge Holt to change her ruling and grant immunity. But that's a hard case to win because they'll have to prove that the judge abused her discretion and ruled incorrectly. And the appellate courts in those kinds of cases, according to the experts that I've talked to, generally give the judge the benefit of the doubt, right? Because the judge is the person who heard the evidence, heard the testimony, has been with the case. And so they usually, just kind of assume the judge did the right thing unless you can prove otherwise, that they didn't. The appeal is what's called a petition for writ of mandamus or mandamus. I'm not really sure how you pronounce it. Everybody has a different way. But it takes on average about 3 to 6 months, according to a court official that I spoke to get those ruled upon by the Court of Criminal Appeals. And if Brittany loses there, she can ask the Alabama Supreme Court to hear the case. But again, the folks I've talked to just say it's really unlikely that she could win there. And so if she does lose her appeals, the case would go to trial in Jackson County. And Brittany has indicated that she wants to take this all the way. So I think that a plea deal is probably really unlikely. I think a trial is the most likely outcome in this case.
So basically, we're just kind of on hold right now while we wait on the appeals court to rule.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ashley. I think that it's important to note, because I've seen a lot of people talking about this online, and I know you have as well. It's important to note that Brittany can still argue self-defense at her jury trial if this case goes to a jury trial. The stand your ground hearing is something that happens before the case even gets to that point to try to get that charge dropped. But if it does go to a jury trial, she still has the freedom to argue that self-defense claim.
Yes, and I would absolutely expect that that's exactly what she would do if/when the case does go to trial. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of legal experts who really think that Brittany may have a better chance arguing this with a jury than she did, with a judge, and than what she will at the appellate level. And one reason for that is it's important to keep in mind that when you're arguing a self-defense stand your ground, pre-trial with a judge, the burden there is on the defense. The defense has to show that more than half of the evidence weighs in their favor. Whereas, as we know, you're innocent until proven guilty, of course, in our justice system. And so at trial, that burden would shift from the defense to prove that it was a self-defense or stand your ground case over to the prosecution to prove that, she's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think a lot of people, in the legal community think she's got a better shot with a jury really than she has with, a judge. So.
Right. And I think that seems to be a common thought between, like you said, people in the legal community and a lot of our commenters and a lot of people who have talked about this case, even down here in Birmingham where I am. I did want to ask you, where's Brittany now? Is she out on bond? Is she in jail?
She is out on bond. Brittany she's making it, from me talking to her. Of course, this is really tough for her. It's really tough to be on bond. They live really close to the Tennessee line, which a lot of folks in North Alabama understand. It's almost like there's not a line there. But for Brittany, she's not allowed to leave the state. So the grocery store that she would normally go to just across the line, she said she can't go there anymore. She's having to, just small things like that. It's tough to be on bond. You have a lot of requirements and restrictions. Brittany has also been really open about the fact that she's had substance abuse issues in the past, substance abuse. And so she is not able to regain custody of her kids right now, because of the pending murder charge. She's not able to go back to school or to work, to try to be able to provide a life for her kids or, to get her own place again. So it's kind of in limbo right now, her life is,
Right, right. Well, and I would love to take some questions from some of our audience members. I was looking through some right now in our comments, and
Yeah.
it seems like, do you know of any, something that several people have asked, do you know of any similar cases to this that have happened in North Alabama?
So I don't really know of a case that kind of fits all the complexities of the storyline here. I can tell you, hang on just a minute, I've got some stuff here. One of the questions that I've heard a lot too is about whether women are able to get stand your ground, and we may talk about that a little bit more. But there was a case here in Huntsville, actually, where a woman said that she was trying to leave her home and was choked by her roommate. And so she had actually argued stand your ground because she took out a knife and killed him. This woman was granted stand your ground immunity, but I mean, there are tons of examples out there of, women who haven't been. It's really hard to know, though. It's really hard to know who has been successful at arguing stand your ground, just because of some issues with how that's reported and tracked, or the lack thereof here in Alabama. So I don't really have a good example of a very similar case. This is just very specific circumstances.
Right. This is a very unique situation, and that was a question from one of our readers named Anne. And there's another question that I thought was interesting, and several people have brought this up. Is there any sort of argument over whether Brittany was raped? Is that in question at all, or at this point are we just arguing about whether the shooting was justified?
So whether the shooting was justified is really the kind of the crux of the legal case. But as I mentioned earlier, there were like more than 30 injuries that were documented on Brittany's body, bite marks, bruises, that sort of thing, evidence of strangulation. And the nurse who testified back at the stand your ground hearing said that, she believed that Brittany had been strangled and hit multiple times. But there was not any physical evidence, I guess, that could prove that she had been raped. The nurse also did point out, though, that that's not uncommon. In most sexual assault cases, there is not genital trauma or DNA evidence of proof. And the judge did write in her order that she believed that Brittany had been assaulted physically, but that she did not find that the evidence was consistent with a rape. But again, just important to note that, it's not proven. It's also not disproved. And there's a lack of evidence in many sexual assault cases. So.
Right, and that was, again, a question that I saw a lot over here. I'm sorry, I keep looking down at my phone. I'm trying to gather some questions. And something that a lot of people ask, and I don't think that Ashley or I have any good information on this right now, so we will try to find some information and leave it in the comments for you. But a lot of people have asked about statistics on different domestic violence situations, about women shooting abusers, things like that. And we will try to get some information for you about that and put it in the comments of this live video for you. So,
Ivana, I do have a little bit, if I could.
Go ahead.
Something that I think is important. There was a reporter, Elizabeth Flock, who reported on this case actually for the New Yorker. I think it's really important to give a shout out to other folks who have done a lot of really good work on this. Also, Lauren Gill, who writes for The Appeal, is the first person who ever actually dove in and kind of told the story. They both did some really good work. And one of the things, sorry, I'm looking down at some of the numbers here. In Elizabeth Flock's reporting for the New Yorker, she reported that in Alabama, let me find these numbers here. Okay, so an analysis of homicide data, which is kept by the FBI, found that in cases where men and women were arguing self-defense and homicides, men were 10% more likely to get that ruling. Alabama today does not actually report justifiable homicides in a way that we can track this information, but they used to. And back when Alabama did track this, these stats showed that women lost their cases 25% more often than men did. Now, of course, we don't know right off from this whether those were people who were arguing domestic violence cases or sexual assault cases or what the case, was. But we do know that these stats show that women are less likely to get one of those rulings than men are. And that's actually something that we've been working on in a totally unrelated project, which I really hope we can, get out to you guys soon. We've been looking at homicide data in Alabama over the past several years. And once we have all that data compiled for this unrelated issue, this will be something that we can actually look at in there as well. So this is something that we're definitely looking into.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Ashley, for having that info.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. I know for a lot of people who've asked that. And, if you're just tuning in, Ashley and I have been talking about the case of Brittany Smith in North Alabama, who is charged with murder for killing a man that she says raped and assaulted her and then was also threatening her family. So if you're interested in that, please go back and watch this video. And if you want to keep up with the latest on the Brittany Smith case, check out AL.com and Ashley Rimkus' coming stories. And with that, we will see y'all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.